This is the hinge in the book. The story of the Day of Atonement. Sacrificial atonement for all sin except blasphemy. This is the one account of a ritual where almost every step is described for us. Verse 2. Tell Aaron, your brother, not to come at all times into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat which is upon the ark, lest he die. For I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. So again, this lid is the mercy seat. And again, that's why the focus of the top of the ark is more important. Verse 5. He shall take from the congregation of the people of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering, 1 ram for a burnt offering. Verse 9. Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord, and offer it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel should be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel. Somebody asked me during break, well, who's this Azazel? This is another one of these questions that Jewish scholars debate and don't have a final solution. Evidently, some kind of desert demon. It's capitalized, so it's kind of seen in that regard. But so first, the priest must atone for himself by the blood of the bull, and that's going to be the next little episode here. Verse 13. Put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat, which is upon the testimony, lest he die. And he shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the front of the mercy seat. And therefore the mercy seat he shall sprinkle the blood with his finger 7 times. So he puts incense. There's the curtain. Okay, so you can imagine a little diaphanous curtain. And out in front of it is the ark, the altar of incense. So you put incense on that so that you get this cloud. So that cloud is kind of like on Sinai when God, comes down on Mount Sinai. It's in a cloud. That cloud is a protective element. So that it's not like you're looking directly at where God is. So then the priest goes through and he sprinkles the bull blood on the lid of the ark 7 times for himself, for his own guilt. Verse 15. Then he shall kill the goat of the sin offering, which is for the people, and bring its blood within the veil, and do with its blood as he did with the blood of the bull, sprinkling it upon the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. Thus he shall make atonement for the holy place. Verse 18. Then he shall go out to the altar, which is before the Lord, and make atonement for it. So each of the articles, the major articles of furnishings, has to be atoned for in this process, before even the people's guilt is dealt with. Verse 20. And when he has made an end of atoning for the holy place, and the tent of meeting, and the altar, he shall present the live goat, and Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat, and confess over it all the iniquities of the people of Israel, and all their transgressions, all their sins, and he shall put them upon the head of the goat, and send him away into the wilderness by the hand of a man who is in the readiness. Therefore, this is the goat that gets away. It is the escape. So scapegoat comes from the goat that escapes. The escape goat. The one goat was offered as part of the ritual cleansing process as a sin offering. This one, the sins are put on it and is driven out into the wilderness. Now, does that imply that it lives forever out there? I don't know. Or does it imply that it's going to get gobbled up by some desert creature? I don't know that. But this animal carries away, ritually, carries away the guilt of the people. So this is the major ritual of the Day of Atonement. And then there's all the regalia he puts on and all the regalia the high priest has to take off. This passage is huge in the New Testament. We won't read the letter to the Hebrews until the 4th year. But it's the last thing we read, I think. And because the preacher of the letter to the Hebrews sees in this ritual a foretaste of what Jesus did on the cross. So he'll talk about how Jesus entered into the heavenly tabernacle, the one not made by hands, with his own blood. Not the animal, not the blood of animals, and that this blood is more articulate than the blood of Abel. Remember, Abel's blood cried out to God. God said to Cain, where's your brother? And I don't know. And his blood cries out to me. And so, what do you imagine? Abel's blood cried out to God. Wow, I want vengeance. I want my life to be, or I want someone to pay for taking my life. But says the letter to the Hebrews that the blood of Jesus is more articulate. It speaks better, kinder, more merciful things. So this ritual of the Day of Atonement continues today. There's no blood sacrifice in Judaism anymore, not since the destruction of the temple in the year 70. But the Day of Atonement continues to be the most significant day in the Jewish calendar. It came in September. Okay? So you'll see in your calendar, you'll see references to Rosh Hashanah, that's New Year's Day, and then 10 days later, the Day of Atonement. Questions about this? Right in the middle of all these chapters of ritual, there is now a lovely chapter of law. This is the third collection of law that we've seen. There was the covenant, the Decalogue, the covenant code. Then there was, as we saw today in chapter 34, there was an additional re-giving of the Decalogue. And now there's this. There is what's called the Holiness Code. Holiness because over and over again, when you ask the question, why? The answer is given, because I, the Lord, am holy. That's why. So let's look at chapter 17. Verse 3. If any man of the house of Israel kills an ox or a lamb or a goat in the camp, or kills it outside the camp, and does not bring it to the door of the tent of meeting to offer it as a gift to the Lord before the tabernacle of the Lord, blood guilt should be imputed to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. I point that out to you because it suggests that all slaughter is sacrificial. That is, it's to be done at the tent. So if you're going to celebrate your wedding with your daughter, and you have an animal that's going to be served up, you take it to the tent of meeting, and you sacrifice, you kill it there, and you pour out the blood there, because all killing has a sacrificial element to it. Verse 8, and you shall say to them, any man of the house of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among them, who offers a burnt offering or sacrifice, and does not bring it to the door of the tent of meeting, to sacrifice it to the Lord, that man shall be cut off from his people. So not just the Jewish person, the Hebrew, but the alien, the other nationality who lives among you, must bring his animal that he's going to slaughter, must bring it to the tent of meeting. If any man of the house of Israel or of the strangers that sojourn among them eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood, and will cut him off from among the people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by reason of the life. So there you have a re-emphasis on the life that dwells in the blood. Chapter 18. This has to do with sexuality. Holiness in sexual relationships. Now, again, we saw earlier that any sexual activity that involves the emission of semen and passage of fluids makes you ritually unclean. Now we're going to talk about proper relationships in sexuality. Say to the people of Israel, I am the Lord your God. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where you dwelt. You shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, in which I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. You shall do my ordinances and keep my statutes and walk in them. I am the Lord your God. Verse 6 is the general rule. None of you shall approach anyone near of kin to him to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. So Judaism, more than other cultures, was concerned with how close in the linear line you were when you engaged in a relationship. We call laws incest laws. So look at verse 20. You shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. You shall not give any of your children to devote them by fire to Molech, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. There is a reference to the Jewish stricture on homosexuality. You shall not lie with any beast and defile yourself with it. Neither shall any woman give herself to a beast to lie with it. It is perversion. So again, a law about a sense about bestiality. Okay, so the mixing, the crossing of boundaries here is drawn. Incest, homosexuality, bestiality, adultery are all categorized as things that are outside the law. Chapter 19. Holiness and social ethics. Say to all the congregation of the people of Israel, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father. You shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves molten gods. Now that should sound familiar to you. Those are elements of the Ten Commandments. So these things keep reappearing in various legal codes, and then we're all brought together. Verse 9, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field to its very border, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. We saw a reference to something like this in the covenant code in Exodus. But let me reiterate what's going on here. This is their sense of a social responsibility to the poor. That you do not treat your orchards and fields like they're completely yours. You do your major picking, your major gleaning, and you leave things on the edge. You leave things for the poor, who will pick up what is remaining. And again, notice that there's no test of how poor you have to be. There's no, you don't have. It's just if you have land that's productive, you take the first pickings, but you should leave for others what remains. That is this again a sense of social ethics. Verse 11, again we pick up things that we sound familiar to the Ten Commandments. You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. You shall not swear by my name falsely. I am the Lord. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired servant shall not remain with you all night until the morning. The purpose there is, again, we think, because you have to have a deposit for a room. You've got to have money saved. In this culture, people often lived hand to mouth. So it was against the law. If I work today, I should get paid today. Now we don't do that in our culture. You get a check every 2 weeks or once a month or whatever. But in this culture, because the reality was day laborers are dependent on that gift for that payment to be able to eat that night. You owe it to them that day, which should tell us something about that community. It wasn't an affluent community. Okay? There was a great deal of working poor. And therefore, the law builds in it that you do not hold back. You pay people what they're owed. Verse 14. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. Even if they can't see it or hear it, I see it, says God. Okay? Verse 15. You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. So justice is justice for all. You do not, punish one group or the other. Verse 16, you shall not go up and down as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand forth against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall reason with your neighbor, lest you bear sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear any grudge against the sons of your own people. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. There finally is the line that should leap out at you. Jesus, when asked which is the greatest commandment, quoted two of them. In chapter 19, verse 18 is one of them. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So, if you've never heard it before, now you should get it. Jesus didn't make it up. I mean, he didn't make up the law of loving your neighbor as yourself. He just pointed it out as one of the two greatest commandments. The other great commandment we'll read next month in Deuteronomy. Okay? Verse 26, you shall not eat any flesh with blood in it. You shall not practice augury or witchcraft. You shall not round off the hair on your temples or mar the edges of your beard. Now, what that last one really is about, we don't know what led this commandment to be stated, but this is the origins of, if you've seen pictures or you've been in a conservative, observant Jewish neighborhood like you might find in the Bronx, you'll find a lot of gentlemen, little children too, but men who have side locks, curled hair. They let this grow very long, and it curls down on both sides. This is, again, they see it as, it's like having a fish pin on your lapel. It's stating to everybody that you're Jewish, okay? These side locks, okay? Now again, not all Jews are observant in this regard, but this is where it comes from. So chapter 19 is a blend. It's mainly all social code. And again, up until this point, it's all been ritual, ritual, ritual. Now it's social code. And over again, you get the statement, why? Why? Because I am holy, because I said so, like your mom would say. Why you do this? Because I say so. Questions?
There was the one thing in there about where you may have to reprove your brother, but don't do it successively or something. Oh, here we go, 17, chapter 17. So you should not bear hatred for your brother in your heart, though you may have to reprove your fellow man and not incur sin because of him. So, how far are we to go in reproving our fellow man if they are in sin?
Happily, Jesus went on and he spoke about that. Remember? Peter asked, how many times?
Can you please repeat the question?
The question is, he read this thing about do not reprove your brother, and he asked, ask the question again, or what were you saying?
Well, the way I understand that is if I see somebody who professes to be a Christian doing something that's not Christian, I should remind them of the fact that it's not Christian. But how insistent or how often or... Because to be honest, that's not something I do a lot.
Well, it's not something that's very welcomed. You know, people say, mind your damn business, is what you might get as a response.
Right, yeah.
But again, if your concern is, if it's something of concern, it's a major issue, not just frivolous thing. Some people are just nosy. But if it's a serious thing, they should be prompted, and you should be willing to pay that price. I think. Again, if you go to the same person, 15 times and you've said it and they're not listening, and I'll talk to the hand, well, maybe you've more than done what's required.
Okay, what, you as a pastor in a church, are you more likely to have to do this? I mean, let's say you don't give communion to someone who's publicly sinning. I don't know, I'm just curious, because it's been in the news, and it happened to Dave Ogie at St. Anne's a while back, and I remember.
In my experience, if I approach somebody about that, I don't see them again. Now, is that a good thing? I don't know. But whenever I approach somebody on that matter, they're gone. So I don't know to tell you, was that the right thing? A literal reading of the law would suggest it's the right thing to do. On the other hand, do you need to kind of like the old line that you could attract more flies with honey than vinegar? Do you try to, bring them in and make them comfortable before you try to correct their ways? I think generally speaking, that's smart. Just to come out and say, hey, that's wrong, or you shouldn't be doing that, probably won't go down well in our climate. You need to build a bridge to them. You need for them to trust you. Then in those situations where I've talked to somebody, even then it doesn't always work happily, I can tell you my own experience. So it's touchy, very touchy.
Chapter 19, verse 8. I've seen this a couple times, but it ends with, such a one shall be cut off from the people.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you're kicked out for good, cut off, or is that
What was the law? What was the crime?
Eating a sacrifice on the third day?
No, that's not. There's nothing like in Christian talk. We talk about the unforgivable sin. I can't think of anything in Judaism that's the unforgivable sin. Again, this whole Leviticus, this whole structure is about making things right. But this is again a punishing or a line drawing. What you've done is crossed the line, and we need to exclude you from our affairs. Yes, you're just picking your ear. You got something to say? Pick in the ear. Okay, that's good. Other questions? Now, Leviticus, from here on out, there isn't much to say. That I'm going to just little bits and pieces that we're going to read. The real lion's share is what we've dealt with so far. Just want to point out some things. Chapter 21. Verse 17. The Lord said to Moses, these are laws about the priesthood. The Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, none of your descendants throughout their generation who has a blemish may approach to offer the bread of his God. You saw earlier in passing that when you bring an animal to sacrifice for the Lord, it must be unblemished. You don't bring your sickly, blind, lame, dopey. Okay, you bring the best. That's going to reappear in some of the prophets. But here, that rule is extended further. Not only is the sacrifice to the unblemished God needing to be unblemished, but the minister of the sanctuary similarly must be unblemished. And by blemish, they don't mean sin. I mean, they mean that too. But what they mean is you have to be a whole, entire, unhandicapped person to be a priest. Again, it's this idea of wholeness, everything in its proper place. This will come up, not so much in the Bible, it comes up in Jewish history. Because there's a case just before the Herods became rulers over Palestine. There was a family that was fighting over who got to be the high priest. And these two guys were duking it out, and one bit off the nose of the other. So in that act, with missing a nose, they could not serve as high priest. Okay? Now, and you might, you're laughing. There was, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this. Maybe Father Diermeyer could do research for us. But there was in the church of my childhood an expectation that to be ordained a priest or a deacon, you couldn't be missing fingers, you couldn't be missing a foot. Those are impediments. So the church, in a sense, this is Old Testament law, and the church didn't observe it, but over the centuries began to go back and apply more and more of it and bring it forward. Now, that's not the case anymore. We have blind clergy, okay? We have clergy who might be missing a leg, but that's no longer an impediment. It was for a while.
What did they do if they became a priest and then lost some?
They couldn't serve. You cannot stand before God, who is whole, yourself not whole.
Wasn't that just the saints that we had the other day? The martyrs that came over here and the indigenous...
North American martyrs, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of the Indians knew that if they cut off the fingers, that would be a major impediment to the so they had to write to Rome to get permission to celebrate Mass.
Right.
But it's not just the fingers. It was more broadly. It was more broadly than that, based on this Old Testament law. Okay. I don't make this stuff up. It's just. Chapter 23 rehearses again the holidays. Now, we talked about holiness in ritual. Here is holiness in keeping festivals. And again, you have a little chart on one of your home. Is it on this page of your homework? Yeah, I'm looking at page 17 of your book. It lists the major feasts. You should, these 3 feasts on page 17, these are the major feasts, and you are expected to go to the temple for them. And so it's Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles. Day of Atonement does not appear on this list. It's Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles. All right? You should know those. Get that in your head. So when you see references, and notice each of them has got an association with a seasonal celebration. Passover corresponds to the barley harvest. Barley was the first crop to be ready to harvest. 7 weeks later was the wheat harvest. That's Pentecost. In the fall, with the grape harvest and olives, was Tabernacles. Each of them also has an historical commemoration, an association with the escape from Egypt. Passover is, of course, the deliverance. The Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, or Shavuot, celebrates the giving of the Torah. And Tabernacles in the fall, or booths, that corresponds to a memorial of how God kept them alive 40 years in the wilderness. So Pentecost we think of as the gift of the Holy Spirit. Well, but add that, the gift of the Holy Spirit in Acts falls on the holiday where Jewish people come to Jerusalem in hordes from all over to celebrate God's making his covenant with them. So in a sense, we have a renewal or a deepening of that covenant. Chapter 25. Another seasonal event. We hear about sabbatical year. Sabbatical, or Sabbath, again, is the 7th day. Well, there was a sabbatical year. A field should be given a year off, allowed to go fallow every 7th year. And then, if you counted 7 sets of 7, then you had a particular festival called a Jubilee. Look at verse 8. You shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7, so that the time of the 7 weeks of your years shall be to you 49. Then you shall send abroad the loud trumpet on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, you shall send abroad the trumpet. The Hebrew word for trumpet is Yobel. Jubilee comes from Yobel, Jubel. And you shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his family. Let me explain. When the Israelites came to the Promised Land, they were all the same. They were all ex-slaves, and they were given each a portion of the land. But I suspect, as in Wisconsin, some of the land was pretty good. Some of the land was pretty sucky. Okay? And some did well. As they farmed, they did well. And some did not so well. Maybe some were lazy. It happens. Maybe some got disease. Maybe there was, maybe the Midianites came and stole some of your flocks. So you found yourself losing ground. So they were all equal, at least theoretically at the beginning. And over the years, some lost value, some gained value. Every 50 years, according to this legislation, you push the button and you reset the game. And everybody goes back to where they started. If you sold your land, if you fell in debt, and you had to sell your land piece by piece, or all of it, because you were a bad farmer, or because you were unlucky, every 50 years, the land came back to you. You could start over, you or your children could start over again. The idea was that God gave the promised land to the whole people. And it's not for them to get rid of. It's theirs forever. It's their heritage. This will come back in the Old Testament. We're going to hear about a king who wants a man to sell his property to the king. The king offers great money for it. And the man says, no, this is my ancestral heritage. I can't give that up. And so the king eventually, or his wife actually, has the man killed so that the king can take possession of it. So now, how often did this really happen? Is it just this is the mind of God, and did the Hebrews really ever do it? We don't know. We don't have any data that suggests if or when or how long this practice continued. You may remember for the year 2000, there was an effort both at the political level and the church level to forgive debts. There was an effort to get the have countries to forgive the indebtedness of third world countries for the year 2000. And Pope John Paul II had a series of charitable things that was done for the millennium year. The idea of a jubilee, 50th year, is what leads to holy years and jubilee years in the church as well. Okay? So again, I point this out. You might think, well, that's kind of quaint, or it wouldn't work today. But I'm just saying, there was a social sensitivity. There was a responsibility. Even if you were just a bad farmer, there was a way of resetting the game. You could try again. Because God had given the land to the whole people so that they wouldn't fall into slavery. All right. 26. And 26 ends with what are called sanctions. If you do this, this is what will happen to you. If you do nasty things will happen to you. Let's just read a little bit of it. Verse 3, the good news. If you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and do them, I will give you your rains in their season, and the land of the field shall yield their fruit, and your threshing shall last to the time of vintage, and the vintage shall last to the time of sowing. There'll be continuous crops growing for you. God will bless your land if you keep these rules. Verse 12. I will walk among you and will be your God, and you shall be my people. I am the Lord your God, who brought you forth out of the land of Egypt, that you should not be their slaves. And I have broken the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. Verse 14. But if you will not hearken to me, and will not do all these commandments, verse 16, I will do this to you. I will appoint over you sudden terror, consumption, and fever, that waste the eyes and cause life to pine away. And you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you, and you shall be smitten before your enemies. Those who hate you shall rule over you. You shall flee when none pursues you. So, this is our first encounter with something that modern people call the law of retribution. That's what we call it in the West. Other cultures call it karma. Okay? Now, I just pointed out to you, because now is not when we get to the year that we read wisdom literature, the third year, the law of retribution will be a major point of discussion. I just want to point out where it comes from. In our reading, here is its first appearance. The example I always use growing up, there was the viaduct on the way into town from where my parents lived, and for the longest time, there was a large billboard that posted by the American Dental Association that said, "Ignore your teeth, and they'll go away." Okay? That's the law of retribution. Right? And we recognize that in our life, huh? All right. Some final statements about Leviticus. Okay? 3 of them, actually. 3 statements. First, the whole structure of Jewish religion is built on the sense of God's otherness. God is unlike you and I. He is other. And the word they use for that is holy. I am holy. I am other. And so the book of Leviticus tries to put that into legal practice. First, what we could call ontological distance, chapters 1 through 16. Separateness, uniqueness, being wholly other, what you eat, what you wear, how you deal with issuance of blood, that sets you apart. And then the last half of Leviticus, moral distance, where Israel is to live a certain way, and how it treats the neighbor, how it treats the alien, how it treats the stranger, how to handle with indebtedness, long-term people falling into debt. This expressed in common concern that things be in their place. Did your mama used to say everything has a place? Okay? Well, that's very much this mindset. Everything has its place. That's a very Jewish idea. Time and territory and morality. Okay? Things and creatures have certain places they should be because God designed it that way. And defilement is what happens when things aren't where they're supposed to be. Impurity. Again, be careful. As Christians, we always associate that with ethical failure. No. It doesn't have to be ethical failure. It can be other kinds of just like not paying attention to the lines. The sacrificial system is provided by God graciously, not as a burden, but graciously, to allow us to walk in fellowship with Yahweh. Remember, the original question was, how can the holy God live among such an unholy people? Well, this system was meant to allow that to happen. Okay.
Could you repeat that about the sacrificial system?
The sacrificial system was provided by God graciously to allow mortals to walk in fellowship with Yahweh. The question raised by the golden calf incident is, are these people capable of holiness? How can the holy God live among people who are so unfaithful? Well, this system was meant to allow for that. Number 2, all of this, again, this is going to seem very strange to some of you, all of this is a construct of God's mercy. All this legal code, all this stuff, which seems a terrible, strange burden to us, and think, how crazy. No wonder St. Paul had issues with his Jewish upbringing. Don't go there, okay? This was seen by Jews as an act of God's graciousness, his mercy. Number 3, in addition to ritual expectations, there are also ethical demands of being a holy people. So there's 2 elements to our role in this. Yes, that we recognize and respect all the lines, the impure thing, the blood thing, the leprosy thing, the seafood thing, but there's also the ethical dimension. Now, I bet you can see, because St. Paul will come along and say, we Gentiles do not need to do the ritual part, but we darn well need to maintain the ethical part. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's next year. Okay? Questions?
I
Are we gonna come back to Leviticus anytime, or, I mean, obviously we skipped some chapters, so.
Yeah, no, the stuff we skipped, we probably skipped for a reason. You can read it on your own.
I thought so.
All right, take a little break.